A mother posts smiling beach photos on social media, her bare feet in the sand, caption reading, "The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived." But back home in Cleveland, her 16-month-old daughter is screaming in the darkness, trapped alone in a playpen. No one is coming. The bottles are empty. The crackers are gone. And this isn't hour 2 of a babysitter running late. This is day 7 of a 10-day vacation. When Kristel Candelario finally returned home on June 16, 2023, she found her baby daughter Jalen weighing just 13 pounds, down from 20. The medical examiner would later discover evidence so significant that seasoned detectives noted it as a standout case in their careers. We're walking through the complete timeline of how a trip to Detroit and Puerto Rico became one of Ohio's most notable criminal cases. We'll uncover the pattern of abandonment that neighbors desperately tried to stop, the devastating evidence that emerged during the investigation, and the courtroom moment when a judge delivered one of the most scathing sentences in recent memory. But stick around, because later, I'll reveal the jail phone calls where Candelario described that fatal vacation. What she said will make you question everything you thought you understood about this case. Let's begin with the morning of June 6th, when Kristel Candelario packed her suitcase and walked out the door. But before we begin, if this case holds your interest, please give it a like at the end and share your thoughts about it. It really helps the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you. So let's set the scene here. It's June 6th, 2023, and Kristel Candelario is dragging a suitcase to her car on Lorraine Avenue in Cleveland. Surveillance cameras catch every moment. She's 31 years old, a single mother, and she's got plans. Big plans, actually. First stop, Detroit with a male companion. Then the main event, Puerto Rico with friends. Now, here's where this gets absolutely chilling. Inside her home, in a small pack-and-play portable playpen, sits her daughter Jalen, 16 months old. Just a baby, really. Still in diapers, still learning to walk properly, still completely dependent on the person who's supposed to protect her above everyone else. And what does Candelario leave for this toddler? A few bottles of milk, some crackers. That's it. Think about that for a second. Most of us panic if we forget our phone charger for an overnight trip. This woman left her baby alone with snacks that wouldn't last a full day, then headed to the airport for a vacation that would span 10 full days. The car pulls away, the house falls silent, and Jalen is utterly, completely alone. Well, Candelario's vacation went exactly as planned. The Detroit portion wrapped up smoothly, then it was off to Puerto Rico. While her daughter sat trapped in that playpen back in Cleveland, Candelario was walking on beaches. She took photos, lots of them, and posted them to social media for everyone to see. In one picture, she's barefoot in the sand, waves in the background, looking completely carefree. The caption she chose? "The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived." Let that sink in. The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived. Meanwhile, back in that Cleveland house, Jalen's bottles were empty. The crackers were gone. The playpen was becoming heavily soiled and unsanitary because there was nobody there to change her diaper, nobody to lift her out when she cried, nobody to feed her when hunger turned to severe malnutrition. By the way, during this vacation, Candelario's ex-boyfriend reached out to ask about Jalen. You know what she told him? That the baby was fine. Just fine. Everything's great. Having a wonderful time, wish you were here. But here's what was actually happening to Jalen during those 10 days. And I want to warn you, this gets extremely difficult to hear. About 2 days after Candelario left, a neighbor's doorbell camera picked up audio around 1 in the morning. Screaming. A baby. Screaming in the darkness. That means Jalen was still alive 2 days in, still conscious enough to cry out for help that would never come. The medical examiner would later determine that Jalen's suffering didn't last hours. It didn't even last just a couple of days. It possibly stretched across an entire week. 7 days of a toddler slowly succumbing to lack of nourishment, alone in a playpen, in a house with no adult supervision whatsoever. The bottles Candelario had left, Jalen drained them all. The crackers, consumed completely, probably within the first day or two. Then came the desperate phase that I honestly struggle to even describe. As the hunger and thirst became unbearable, as her tiny body began shutting down from lack of water and food, Jaylin did the only thing she could to survive. She resorted to ingesting non-food items. Yes, you heard that correctly. This 16-month-old baby, driven by extreme hunger, resorted to consuming unsanitary matter. Investigators would later find biological evidence of this in her mouth and under her fingernails. The medical examiner confirmed it wasn't accidental. This was a desperate attempt at survival from a child who didn't understand why her mother had disappeared, why the food was gone, why nobody came when she cried. And through all of this, every single moment of Jaylin's suffering, Candelario was posting vacation photos, walking beaches, enjoying what she clearly considered well-deserved time off. 10 days. That's how long she stayed away. 10 full days while her daughter passed away. So on June 16th, Candelario finally came back to Cleveland. It's about 8 in the morning when she walks through the door of her home. Surveillance footage captures her return, just like it captured her departure. She's back from her vacation, probably tired from the flight, maybe thinking about unpacking. Then she walks into the house and finds her daughter. Now, what happens next is crucial to understanding just how calculated some of her actions were. Candelario finds Jaylin unresponsive in that playpen. The baby has clearly passed away, possibly days prior at this point. The scene is tragic. The playpen is in a state of severe disarray. The smell alone would have been overwhelming. But here's the thing that made investigators' blood run cold. Before calling 911, Candelario changed her daughter's clothes. She took the time to dress Jaylin in clean clothing. Think about what that means. She knew exactly how bad the situation looked. She understood that the condition of that playpen, the state of her daughter, would immediately reveal what had happened, so she tried to clean up the scene first. Only then did she call for help. Emergency responders from Cleveland Police and Fire arrived quickly, but of course, there was nothing they could do. Jaylin was pronounced deceased at the scene, and the first responders who walked into that house, veteran police officers and paramedics who'd seen plenty of terrible things in their careers, were completely shaken by what they encountered. The medical examination began shortly after, and what Dr. Elizabeth Mooney from the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office discovered painted an absolutely devastating picture of Jaylin's final days. At her last doctor's appointment back in April, just 2 months earlier, Jaylin had weighed about 20 pounds. That's a healthy weight for a 16-month-old. Normal development. When Dr. Mooney examined her in June, Jaylin weighed 13 pounds. She'd lost more than a third of her body weight. Let me put that in perspective for you. For an adult weighing, say, 150 pounds, that would be like dropping down to under 100 pounds in 2 months. But actually, it was worse than that, because the significant weight loss happened in just those 10 days of abandonment. Well, the medical findings got even more disturbing. Jaylin was severely dehydrated. Her body had been without adequate water for days. She was extremely emaciated, with sunken eyes and skin that had become dry and brittle. Her kidneys had started to fail. She developed ketoacidosis, which happens when the body starts breaking down reserves for energy because there's no food coming in. It's essentially the body turning on itself to survive. Dr. Mooney's official determination: cause of death was starvation and severe dehydration due to caregiver neglect. Manner of death: homicide. Not an accident, not a tragic mistake, homicide. And remember that biological matter found in Jaylin's mouth and under her fingernails? That detail became one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. This baby had been so desperately hungry that she'd tried to consume unsanitary material. Dr. Mooney testified later that Jaylin's suffering had lasted not only hours, not days, but possibly even a week. Try to imagine that. A full week of a toddler slowly fading, crying out for help that never came, suffering in ways that most of us can't even begin to comprehend. Now here's what absolutely nobody saw coming, and this is where this case takes an even darker turn. Because June 2023 wasn't the first time Kristel Candelario had abandoned her daughter. Not even close. Actually, let me tell you the most shocking part first. Several weeks before that fatal vacation, Candelario had asked neighbors to watch Jaylin for a weekend. Just a weekend, she'd said. The neighbors agreed because they cared about this little girl. They'd seen her around the neighborhood, always smiling, always curious about everything, just a sweet, happy baby. So Candelario dropped Jalen off for the weekend. Then the weekend passed. No Candelario. Days turned into a week. The week turned into 2 weeks. The neighbors tried calling her. No answer. They tried again. Nothing. Radio silence. Candelario didn't come back for Jalen for approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She dumped her toddler with neighbors and essentially ghosted them for a month and a half. When the investigation started pulling on threads, talking to neighbors, building a timeline of Candelario's parenting, or lack thereof, they discovered this pattern of neglect that multiple people had witnessed and desperately tried to intervene against. One neighbor later told the press, "We keep telling her not to leave her by herself. Not just me, my friend across the street too, but she always leave her by herself." Multiple people in this community had repeatedly warned Candelario that what she was doing was dangerous, irresponsible, completely unacceptable, but she kept doing it anyway. Get this, just before that fatal 10-day vacation, Candelario had left Jalen alone for 2 days. 2 full days. A test run, essentially. And apparently, when nothing catastrophic happened during those 48 hours, or at least when she wasn't caught, she felt emboldened to extend the abandonment to 10 days. Another neighbor, clearly heartbroken, said, "There were so many people here. She could have knocked on any of our doors and asked us to take Jalen." That's the tragic reality here. This didn't have to happen. Candelario had resources. She had people around her who cared about her daughter, who would have helped. She could have asked literally any neighbor to watch Jalen while she took her vacation. Instead, she chose to leave a baby alone for 10 days. By the way, this is a good moment to mention something that came out later. Candelario actually has 2 daughters. Jalen had an older sister, 7 years old at the time. During that fatal June vacation, the older daughter was staying with Candelario's parents in Ecuador. She was safe, she was supervised, she was with family. So Candelario clearly understood the concept of arranging childcare. She'd done it for her older daughter. She just chose not to do it for Jalen. The question that haunts everyone who studied this case is simple and impossible to answer. Why? Why leave one child with grandparents and the other alone in a playpen to die? Anyway, here's another detail that shocked investigators. Cuyahoga County Children and Family Services had absolutely no prior record of cases involving Candelario. There had been no formal reports, no investigations, no intervention from Child Protective Services. Despite all the neighbors witnessing this pattern of abandonment, despite people warning her repeatedly, nobody had made that official call to authorities. It's one of those terrible what-ifs. What if someone had contacted CPS during one of those earlier abandonments? What if the system had intervened before June 2023? Would Jalen still be alive? So Cleveland Police Detective Thaleman Powell Jr., everyone calls him TJ, caught this case. He's a seasoned homicide investigator, 17 years on the job. He's seen horrible things. That comes with the territory in homicide. But nothing, absolutely nothing in his career had prepared him for what he encountered with Jalen Candelario. Well, Detective Powell and his team went to work building what would become an absolutely airtight case. The investigation was painstakingly thorough. They reviewed over 600 hours of doorbell camera footage and traffic cameras. 600 hours. That's 25 full days of video to comb through, looking for every piece of evidence, every movement, every timeline detail. And remember those vacation photos Candelario posted? Well, investigators found something on her phone that made them even more sinister. The metadata, the digital fingerprint embedded in every photo, showed exactly when and where each picture was taken. They could track her entire journey, timestamp by timestamp, while cross-referencing it with Jalen's estimated time of death. The photos weren't just evidence of negligence. They were a chronological record of a mother enjoying herself while her daughter died. The surveillance footage told a clear story too. There was Candelario on June 6th, hauling that suitcase to her car, driving away. The cameras tracked her departure from the neighborhood. Then, 10 days of nothing. No one entering or leaving that house. No activity whatsoever, just silence and darkness behind those walls, while inside a baby slowly died. Then on June 16th, the cameras captured Candelario's return. Same car, pulling back up to the house. She was the only person who'd been in or out during those 10 days. There was absolutely no question about who was responsible. Candelario was arrested on June 17th, literally the day after she returned home and found her daughter dead. She was taken into custody and charged, initially at the municipal level. Then, a Cuyahoga County grand jury reviewed the evidence and returned a 6-count indictment. The charges were severe: aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, felonious assault, and endangering children. Now here's something significant. Prosecutors initially reserved the right to seek the death penalty. They were seriously considering capital punishment for this case. That tells you everything about how horrific they found the circumstances. Prosecutor Michael O'Malley later called it a new low in parental care. And honestly, that captures exactly what made this case stand out, even among child abuse cases. At her first court appearance on June 20th, 2023, the judge set bond at $1 million. That's an extraordinarily high bond, reflecting the severity of the charges and likely the flight risk assessment. After all, this was a woman who'd already demonstrated a willingness to abandon her children for extended periods. On June 29th, Candelario appeared before Judge Brendan J. Sheehan in common pleas court for her arraignment on the indictment. She pleaded not guilty. Her attorneys began building a defense, and the case moved toward trial. But then, months later, something changed. Whether it was the overwhelming strength of the evidence, advice from her legal team, or some genuine realization of the hopelessness of her situation, Candelario decided to take a plea deal. So on February 22nd, 2024, about 8 months after Jalen's death, Kristel Candelario stood in court and changed her plea. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated murder and 1 count of child endangerment. The remaining charges were dismissed as part of the plea agreement. The death penalty was taken off the table. Now, the sentencing hearing was scheduled for March 18th, and this is where Candelario's defense team made their final play. They weren't trying to get her off. She'd already admitted guilt, but they were hoping to create enough mitigation, enough context, to potentially avoid life without parole. Their strategy centered entirely on Candelario's mental health history. And look, this deserves to be examined honestly, because mental illness is real and serious. According to the defense, Candelario had been hospitalized for nearly 2 months in January and February of 2023, just months before Jalen's death. This wasn't a brief stay. This was almost 60 days of inpatient psychiatric care following a severe mental health crisis. She'd been struggling with severe depression and anxiety. Her attorney, Derek Smith, acknowledged up front that his client's behavior was self-centered and severely negligent.
Everything that I'm about to get into here today, and my client agrees with me, is no justification for her actions. And what the prosecution said, actions matter, and these actions are narcissistic, selfish, abhorrent, absolutely worst parenting imaginable.
He wasn't trying to excuse what she'd done, but he argued there was important context. Candelario had been on antidepressants, and according to the defense, she'd stopped taking them abruptly. That sudden cessation of psychiatric medication, Smith argued, had affected her judgment and decision-making. At the sentencing hearing, Candelario herself addressed the court. She stood up, tearful, and said, "There's so much pain that I have in regards to the loss of my baby, Jalen. I'm extremely hurt about everything that happened. I am not trying to justify my actions, but nobody knew how much I was suffering and what I was going through." Her parents also spoke at the sentencing through interpreters. Candelario's family is from Ecuador, and her parents' primary language is Spanish. Clever Candelario and Ketty Torres described their daughter's mental health battles and asked the court for mercy, expressing their own grief over their granddaughter's death. So for a moment, there it was. The defense had laid out a narrative of a severely mentally ill woman who'd made catastrophic decisions while in crisis. Mental illness is real. Depression is real. The effects of suddenly stopping psychiatric medication can be severe and dangerous. And that defense might have generated some level of sympathy, some understanding that this was a sick person who'd done terrible things while not in her right mind. But then the prosecution stood up, and they had evidence that would completely obliterate that narrative. Here's what the defense didn't know was coming. While Candelario was sitting in jail awaiting trial, while her attorneys were building this narrative of a mentally ill mother who'd made a tragic mistake during a mental health crisis. She was making phone calls, and those calls are recorded. She knew they were recorded. There are literally warnings on every jail phone that conversations may be monitored. But she talked anyway. Prosecutors played some of these calls at the sentencing hearing, and they absolutely destroyed any sympathy Candelario might have received. In one call, Candelario described her Puerto Rico vacation. Want to guess how this supposedly mentally ill, grief-stricken mother characterized the trip during which her daughter died? She called it a blast. That's the word she used, a blast. Not a blur she couldn't remember because of her mental state, not a period she regretted. A blast. She remembered it fondly. She spoke about it with enthusiasm. But it gets even worse. In another conversation, Candelario started comparing herself to other inmates, trying to minimize what she'd done. She said, and I quote, "It's not like I did it intentionally. It's not like I picked up a gun or bat or the girl suffered physical trauma." Let that sink in for a second. It's not like I did it intentionally. She left a 16-month-old baby alone with a few bottles and some crackers. She booked trips to Detroit and Puerto Rico. She packed a suitcase. She posted vacation photos on social media with captions about enjoying life. She told her ex-boyfriend the baby was fine when he asked. She stayed gone for 10 full days, the entire planned duration of her vacation. And somehow, in her mind, that wasn't intentional? The mental health defense collapsed right there in that courtroom. Whatever struggles Candelario had with depression and anxiety, and I'm not saying those weren't real, she clearly understood what she'd done. She clearly remembered the vacation. She clearly was trying to rationalize and minimize her responsibility. Prosecutor Ana Faralia had perhaps the most cutting response to this defense. She looked at Candelario and said, "Animals take care of their infants better." And she's absolutely right. Even animals, creatures operating purely on instinct, without human intelligence or moral reasoning, don't abandon their young to starve. It's one of the most basic biological imperatives across virtually every species on Earth. Protect and feed your offspring. The courtroom had just witnessed something remarkable. The defense had built a careful narrative of mental illness and impaired judgment. And then Candelario's own words, her own voice, had torn that narrative to shreds. She wasn't too mentally ill to remember the vacation fondly. She wasn't too impaired to try minimizing her guilt. She was fully aware of what she'd done. She just didn't think it was as bad as other crimes. Well, Judge Brendan Sheehan had heard enough, and what he said next became instantly famous, quoted by news outlets across the country, because it captured exactly what everyone in that courtroom was thinking. But first, others spoke. Detective Powell took the stand, and this veteran investigator, someone who's literally trained to maintain professional distance from tragic crimes, looked directly at Candelario and said,
"I was the lead detective investigator on this case, and I can honestly say, Your Honor, in my 17-year career as a Cleveland police officer, this by far is the most horrific case I've ever had to investigate, Now, I've been a detective for 10 years.
Then he did something unusual. Detective Powell read a poem he'd written for Jalen, for this baby he'd never met alive, but whose death had clearly shaken him to his core. One line from that poem has stuck with everyone who heard it. Jalen's life truly mattered. Unfortunately, she died trying to survive off unsanitary matter. That's not flowery legal language. That's raw truth. That's a detective who couldn't maintain professional distance anymore, because what happened to this child demanded to be spoken plainly. Sergeant Teresa Gomez spoke next, representing the other officers who'd worked the case. She told the court that many officers were tormented by thoughts of what Jalen suffered, and that this case would be branded in our minds and in our hearts forever. Then Judge Sheehan spoke, and his words cut through everything. The mental health arguments, the pleas for mercy, all of it. He looked at Candelario and said,
"Instead, I see photos of you on a beach while your child was eating her own feces in an attempt to survive. Photos mean something. And I'm well aware of mental health, but didn't look like you were too concerned about your child. The only difference will be that prison will at least feed you and give you liquids that you denied her.
He said the case stunned people across this world because it defies one of the basic human responsibilities. The sentence came down: life in prison without the possibility of parole for the aggravated murder charge, plus 8 to 12 years for child endangerment to run concurrently. Kristel Candelario, at 32 years old, would spend the rest of her life behind bars. She would never walk free again, never see a beach again, never take another vacation. And unlike her daughter, she would be fed, she would be given water, she would survive. Kristel Candelario is currently serving her life sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women, admitted on March 27, 2024. Her inmate number is W112921, and she'll carry that number for the rest of her life. Now, the case didn't quite end with sentencing. Candelario decided to appeal her conviction, arguing she'd received ineffective assistance of counsel. The claim stemmed from an incident where she'd accused one of her attorneys of giving her contraband in a holding cell, a glass perfume vial, which led to temporary restrictions on counsel visits. But on January 16, 2025, just this year, the 8th Appellate District Court of Appeals unanimously shot down her appeal. They found her arguments unsupported and affirmed her conviction. The appeals process at that level is finished. Her life sentence without parole stands. She's 33 years old now. Unless something extraordinary happens in future appeals, she'll spend the next 50 or 60 years behind bars. And given what she did, given how Jalen suffered, most people would say that's exactly where she belongs. This case stands as one of the most disturbing child neglect cases in recent Ohio history. A 16-month-old girl died a prolonged and difficult death, while her mother posted cheerful beach photos. The case revealed a pattern of abandonment that neighbors had desperately tried to stop, but the system failed to intervene in time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to True Crime Intel for more true crime cases. See you in the next one.